Okay, we're going to continue our discussion of commas by talking about commas with introductions, or sometimes people call them introductory phrases. Okay, commas with introductions. What I mean by this is if you have a sentence like this one, in which the first phrase in the sentence is not the subject and the verb of the main clause. In other words, this is the part of sentence that would make it a whole sentence on its own. I won't eat the seafood. Okay, we've got a subject, I, we've got a main verb, will not eat, we've got a direct object. Okay, this is a complete sentence. That is a complete sentence right there. The first part of this is not a complete sentence if I ever go back there. And in this case, what we would call this is an introduction. In other words, we need a comma to show that this part of the sentence is separate from this part of the sentence. That's what its job is. So let's take a look at another example. Before Barack Obama was president, he was a senator from Illinois. So again, we have a pronoun as the subject, he. We have a verb, was. This could be a complete sentence. Okay, this could not be a complete sentence. And again, this is what we call an introduction. If it begins with, I believe these are called subordinating conjunctions. Sometimes they begin with prepositions. You don't really need to know that, but what you need to know is be able to recognize the main clause and one of these little introductory phrases that comes at the beginning of the sentence. And that's what an introduction is. Sometimes people will confuse one aspect of this, and that is when you have a really long phrase that begins a sentence, and that long phrase itself is actually the subject of the sentence. Here's an example of what this looks like. To save enough money for retirement while still spending enough money to live comfortably today should be the goal of every investor. Now, when you look at that sentence and you start thinking about diagramming it and labeling the parts, what's the verb? Where's the main verb in that whole construction? And if you think about it, it really is should be. Okay, that's when they're telling us that something should be something. And the first part of it, the noun, it turns out, is this whole phrase right here. That's the thing that should be the goal of every investor. Okay, or the two things that should be the goal of every investor. So it would actually be an error to put a comma in a sentence like this. So a lot of times people see a long phrase like this at the beginning of the sentence and they think, oh, I have an introduction. Well, if that introduction is a subject of the sentence, it isn't an introduction, and therefore it does not get a comma. Okay, let's look at another use of commas. And in your style book, I believe it labels this section commas with conjunctions. But I like to think of it as commas with compound sentences. And, because in our lists, when we talked about commas with a series, those had conjunctions in them as well. But these are going to be a different kind of conjunction, or a conjunction that's used for a different purpose. And here's where we're linking two independent clauses together. Okay, and I apologize for all the grammar terminology, but sometimes it's necessary. Independent clause, something that could stand on its own as a complete sentence. We ate a delicious meal. That is a complete thought. It's got a subject, it's got a verb, it's got a direct object in this case. It would make sense by itself. The next day we got sick. Again, complete thought. The next day we got sick. This is telling us when. In this case, the subject is we. I guess the verb would be got. Maybe sick is the verb. It doesn't matter. The point is that this is a complete. We can see easily that this is a complete thought. Now we've got a conjunction linking those two things together. Okay, when you have two independent clauses joined by a conjunction, you need to use a comma to show that they are one sentence with two independent clauses. So that's what that comma is for. But I think it's also important to understand when you should not use a comma. Suppose we had phrased this sentence differently. Suppose we had said, we ate a delicious meal and got sick the next day. Well, now we actually don't have a compound sentence anymore because we don't. This conjunction is not joining two complete sentences. We ate a delicious meal, that could be a complete sentence, but got sick the next day, that's just the end of the sentence. So if you look at it, the thing in its entirety, this sentence has one subject, we, and it has two verbs that stem off of we. We ate and we got. Okay, so we've got one subject but two verbs. This is not a compound sentence. I think this would be called a compound predicate, if you will, and there's no reason to use a comma there because we don't have two independent pieces here. These things both have to stem off the same, oh, sorry about that, guys, have to stem off the same noun. So yeah, well, you don't use a comma there. Also, AP will allow you, if you have a sentence back up here to our two independent clauses, will allow you to omit the comma if the clauses are really short and if you're going for a certain literary effect. But I would say, for the sake of learning and editing, look for the compound sentences and go ahead and put that comma there when it belongs. And one last thing that ties in with this part of use of commas is when not to use commas, or how not to use them, how not to abuse commas, use them for something that they were not designed to do. And this is the classic example. I enjoy myself every time I go to Disney World. Okay, complete thought. It is my favorite place in America. Also a complete thought. Both of those things could stand alone as a complete sentence. But what does this sentence not have? It doesn't have a conjunction. It doesn't have an and, for example, in the middle, linking those two things together. So if you want to write it this way without the conjunction, you cannot just smash them together with a comma, link them together with a comma. It has to be something else, and there is a specific name for this type of error. I'm going to get rid of this just to make it, oh boy, I lost it again. There we go. This is called a comma splice, and it is a type of sentence error. People make these all the time. So there's always three ways to fix a comma splice. Number one, insert that conjunction. If you put that conjunction there, it's not a comma splice anymore. Now we've got a compound sentence with a conjunction linking the two pieces. Another way you can do is just go ahead and make it two sentences. We said these would stand on their own as independent sentences, and there they are. The other thing you can do is, instead of a comma, you can use a semicolon, in which case this is now one long compound sentence technically, and it's joined, and a semicolon is an appropriate acceptable punctuation mark to join things this way without using the conjunction. So don't use a comma there. Always three ways to fix it. So just keep that in mind. This is an error that people tend to make a lot. I notice it mostly when people are punctuating quotes spoken by somebody else, because again, they're trying to punctuate for the pauses. They feel like those sentences need some sort of punctuation, but the way they were spoken, they seem to go closely together. And people tend to just use that comma because it didn't feel like a full sentence break the way that they heard it. When the person spoke that sentence to them in their head, they don't hear it as two completely separate thoughts. But you can't use a comma there. You would need to use a semicolon if you wanted to preserve that relationship.